Hi everyone, it's Tish. Thank you for joining me today. Today's video is a little different. It's regarding a citizens initiative that's coming up in Maine. So it may only be of interest to my Maine viewers, but if you're interested in Maine political happenings, feel free to stick around. I will be back to more book review videos, and I've got another project in the works that is coming soon. I'm very excited about. So stay tuned for more book reviews and some new content. In the meantime, anyone that lives in Maine, like I do, has undoubtedly seen ads or received direct mailers for this Pine Tree Power Company that's being proposed. I think all of us are aware that ads don't tell the whole story, especially when they're political ads, and you should always read the fine print. Well, in the interest of reading the fine print, I went to their website and I downloaded the text of the actual initiative to read through, so I was aware of what the fine print was before voting. I strongly encourage you to do the same. I'm going to actually put a link in the description where you can go and download that. Just download it, read through it for yourself, and make up your own mind. Don't make your decision, don't vote based just on the ads, because that's marketing. So I'm not reading the entire text, and this is not an in-depth legal analysis of this. This is just me reading some excerpts and kind of giving you my thoughts on those. I'm just a regular Mainer, so for what it's worth, these are things that jumped out to me as problems with this proposed initiative. Okay. The company finances itself by issuing debt against its future revenues to purchase the facilities of investor-owned electric transmission and distribution utilities in the state. And this is just the summary part. So Pine Tree Power Company is starting out not getting investors and not getting loans or other capital funding based on, we've got a great business plan, people who evaluate it and think it looks good and think we can succeed. They're just issuing debt against future revenue, which is not a great place to start a business from, but let's go on. The company is subject to rate making and other oversight by the Public Utilities Commission. I'm not sure why this is supposed to be a selling point, because everyone's electric bill in Maine has risen significantly. Mine is almost doubled in the past year. Every one of the rate increases has been approved by the Maine Public Utilities Commission. So saying that Pine Tree Power Company would be subject to the same oversight by the Public Utilities Commission and couldn't raise rates without getting their permission, how is that different from what we already have? It's not. So I'm not sure why they're including that as a selling point for this initiative, but we'll move on. The company is governed by a board of 13 members, 7 of whom are each elected to represent 5 state Senate districts, as well as the 6 designated expert members. So Maine has 35 Senate districts. Each of these 7 elected members will be representing 5 of the Senate districts. And then the 6 designated members are going to be chosen by the 7 elected members. Now, politicians can run a great campaign. They're good at getting elected. They're not necessarily good at running a utility. The problem with this is you run the risk of having people in charge of running a utility company based on their ability to run a good campaign, based on their charismatic appeal, not necessarily based on their actual qualifications and experience. I would never want someone running a company that I was involved with based on who got voted, who was the most popular. They're not going to be the most qualified. The people with real-world experience are usually too busy working to cultivate the type of skills that politicians need, to be blunt. But we'll move on. The initiated bill also directs the Public Utilities Commission, beginning January 1st, 2025, to find a transmission and distribution utility unfit to serve and to direct the sale of the utility if the utility meets certain criteria. Okay, so they are giving the Public Utilities Commission, which is a government, a branch of the government. So you are giving the government the directive that if they find a business unfit, they have to make the business sell to someone else. Having the government determine whether a business is unfit and then to make them sell to someone else isn't necessarily a good thing. Well, okay, it's not a good thing, and that's not what government is here to do. It's not within their scope of authority. Now let's move on to the estimate of fiscal impact, which is important because one of their selling points is we're not using taxpayer money to fund our daily operations, which is true. But we are going to see as we read through this, there are some areas where the taxpayers are going to be on the hook for something. It establishes a process for the Pine Tree Power Company to purchase the assets of an investor-owned electric transmission and distribution facility operating in the state. The purchase is anticipated to be financed through the issuance of bonds and the debt service cost of those bonds, and the cost of operation will be funded through the utility rates charged to the consumers. So we're still going to be paying our bills at a rate required to be able to operate the business, which is reasonable and fair, but we're also going to have to be paying a rate high enough so that they can cover those debts that they are incurring from issuing debt against future revenue in order to buy out existing utilities. So that's something to keep in mind. The Public Utilities Commission has indicated its additional regulatory authority will require 3 staff attorney positions and 6 utility analyst positions at a projected cost of $1,294,169 in the first year and $2,275,349 in subsequent years. Since the PUC is funded by an assessment set to produce sufficient revenue for the expenditures allocated by the legislature for operating the PUC, the increased expenditures will require a corresponding increase in revenue from assessments on transmission and distribution utilities. These costs may be passed on to the electric utility customers through scheduled rate cases in the future. I think they meant rate changes. So the Public Utilities Commission is funded by things that are assessed and paid for by the utilities. Well, the utility, in this case, Pine Tree Power, can pass that additional cost onto us as customers. And you're adding 9 additional positions at the Public Utilities Commission. So who is going to be paying their salaries? Well, we're paying their salaries. The initiative also requires that no earlier than January 1st, 2025, the Public Utilities Commission shall decertify investor-owned electric transmission and distribution utilities operating in the state that fail to meet criteria established in this initiative. This action, combined with provisions designed to force the utilities subject to decertification to sell assets to the Pine Tree Power Company, may result in litigation. Any litigation costs may be passed on to consumers. You're using the government to force a company to sell their company to you, and you think there may be litigation? No kidding, Sherlock. And of course, who's footing the bill for this litigation? Who's paying for the lawsuits? We're paying for the lawsuits. We're the customers. The 7 elected members of a 13-person governing board may participate in the Maine Clean Elections Program. The Commission on Governmental Ethics and Election Practices estimates that up to 11 candidates may choose to use the program in the first election cycle after the Pine Tree Power Company is established, for a cost to the Commission of $335,450 from April through June in the first fiscal year, and $273,750 from July through October in the second fiscal year. Qualifying contributions from candidates are anticipated to generate an additional revenue of $13,900 in the first year and $9,900 in the second fiscal year. Subsequent election cycles are estimated to require payments to candidates of $110,764 or $166,145, depending on whether 2 or 3 board members are being elected. So the campaigns being run by the people who want to be on the board of this utility are going to be eligible to be funded through the Maine Clean Elections Fund. Well, do you know who funds the Maine Clean Elections Fund? We do. Since the Pine Tree Power Company will be exempt from income taxes, the state will see a decrease in general fund revenue from the corporate income taxes that are currently paid by the investor-owned utilities currently operating in the state. Okay, a significant portion of Maine tax revenue comes from corporate taxes. I'm not sure about numbers. I haven't looked at that, but given that we're talking about Central Maine Power and Versant, I'm guessing that their corporate taxes amount to a not insignificant chunk of tax revenue every year received by the state of Maine. The new proposed Pine Tree Power Company will not have to pay income taxes. They'll be classified as a nonprofit company, so they don't pay corporate income taxes. Here's the problem. Is the state of Maine going to cut their budget accordingly? Meaning, okay, if we're suddenly making $2 million less in tax revenue, they're going to cut $2 million from the budget. And that's, I don't know what the number is. I just pulled the number out of my hat. Historically speaking, that's not usually how governments work. So they're probably going to be raising the money either by raising taxes or adding additional taxes. You know, it's possible we'll see an extra tax added to our utility bill, similar to how your telecommunications bill, you know, for your internet or your phone or whatever, has extra taxes on there. We pay taxes on telecommunications. We may end up paying taxes on utilities as well to help offset that. I'm not sure. They don't talk about how the state's going to address that issue. They will still be paying property taxes to the municipalities, but there's still going to be a taxpayer cost here that they're really downplaying. They're saying there's not going to be a taxpayer cost. There's going to be a taxpayer cost. So moving on to the actual body of the legislation that's being proposed here. The commission shall find a transmission and distribution utility with 50,000 or more customers unfit to serve and shall require and ensure the sale of the utility to be completed within 24 months if 4 or more of the following statements are true of the utility. So again, the main problem here is that we are giving the government the ability to say, we do not think you are running your business according to what we've determined are the standards you should be meeting. So we're forcing you to sell your company to someone else. That's not within the scope of what the government's supposed to do, because we're not dealing with violations of rights or crimes being committed or the things that the government is really supposed to be doing. The government is not supposed to be telling businesses how to run their business. Outside of, as I said, defending rights and dealing with criminal actions like, you know, theft. Obviously, it's not okay for a company to be stealing another company or something. That's absolutely a matter of law. And the courts can also litigate cases where there's a question of if there's been a breach of contract or if there has been commission of a crime. By and large, the government should be mostly hands off when it comes to business. And that's important to keep in mind here. But I do want to go through these eight different areas that they say if 4 or more of these statements are true of the utility, then the Public Utilities Commission has to find them unfit, because there are also problems with each of these. And as I said, the bigger issue is the government shouldn't be making these determinations, but there's problems with each of the issues, with each of the 8 points they bring up. First is customer satisfaction. The utility's been rated for 2 or more of the past 5 years among the lowest decile of utilities of a similar size for customer satisfaction on a nationally recognized survey of the United States utility businesses or residential customers. Who's conducting this survey? Who's paying for this survey? You're just saying a nationally recognized survey. This is very vague. And surveys are tricky. You can absolutely skew surveys. This is not a good criteria. Reliability. The utility has been found by the Commission or by the United States Energy Information Administration for 2 or more of the past 5 years to have overall reliability in terms of outage minutes per year with or without major event days in the lowest decile of utilities of a similar size in the country. So it sounds like they don't have to take into account major event. I'm not sure what they're defining major event days as, but the thing that I find concerning is you have the potential to say, well, say the ice storm back in the 90s. I don't know how many of you remember that. I do. There were people who went, a few weeks before they got power back. We went a few days. I think everyone in rural Maine was without power for a while. And if they don't have to take that into account when deciding if someone's reliable or not, whether a utility is reliable or not, that's not exactly fair, because there are natural disasters. There are things that happen that impact reliability that are no fault of the company. And when you have a wide-scale disaster, it can take a really long time to get things back up and running. And that's not necessarily the company's fault. That's just how things work when we have some of the large natural disasters. Affordability. In 2 or more of the past 5 years, the utility charged residential delivery rates reasonably estimated to be in the highest decile among utilities of a similar size in the country, based on data from the United States Energy Information Administration, and based on the Commission's analysis of average delivery rates as a proportion of the average total bill for integrated utilities. Okay, so they're not saying your rates, if the rate for the electric transmission is among the highest, because on our bills we pay 2 different things. We pay for the electricity we use, and then we pay for transmission or delivery of the electricity we use. And Pine Tree Power Company is proposing to become the provider for delivery of electricity. And they're not saying, well, your rate that you charge for delivery can't be among the highest. It's just saying it can't be among proportionally highest when you're taking into account the total bill, which includes both the electricity and the delivery charge. So if we have a really high rate that we're paying for electricity, then yes, we can still be paying a really high rate for transmission because the proportion's okay. The proportion is not skewed too much in one direction. So you can still have a really high bill if your base electricity rate is also high. And if you've looked at your bill lately, at least for me, both my electric and my transmission costs are high. So, employees. The utility has within the previous year contracted with a business to perform work valued at more than $100,000 that could reasonably have been performed by qualified non-exempt employees of the utility. There are a lot of reasons why a company might contract work out. It's possible that it's more cost effective to use a contractor because you're doing something that maybe you've got employees that could be redirected to this, but it could still be more cost effective to instead hire out a contractor to do something that they're doing all the time instead of redirecting employees. It might be a lot faster. If you've got a large project, you might want to bring in extra contracted employees for that specific project so that it can be done more quickly for the benefit of everyone, the business and the employees and the consumers. You might also have employees that could be reasonably qualified to do a job, but if they're already busy with something else, you can't necessarily add that onto their workload. If someone's working 60 hours a week, you can't add another 60-hour-a-week project on top of them just because they're qualified for that. That's not okay either. So that's very short-sighted. There are a lot of completely reasonable, legitimate reasons why a company might choose to contract certain things out. Security. The utility owns critical infrastructure vital to the security and welfare of the state and is presently owned either wholly or in part greater than 5% by a government that does not represent or govern the captive customers of the utility. I am all for local business. I think the more local things are, the better. That being said, I'm always leery whenever people start touting security and welfare because, historically speaking, a lot of abuses and overreaches of power have happened under the guise of security or welfare of the people because all of us want to be safe. We all want to be secure. We want our families to be safe and secure. So these are buzzwords that elicit like an emotional reaction from us. Yes, we want security. We want safety. We want protection. And because of that, it's really easy to slip things under and to have government overreach under the guise of security because, we want to be safe. but that doesn't mean it's a good thing. So we have to be critical thinkers in addition to everything else. So customer obligations, the utility, due to its corporate structure, requires that customers pay for the cost of the utility's corporate taxes and also pay for shareholder profits exceeding 10% on Prudential Capital investments in transmission infrastructure with little to no risk for poor performance. Okay, Business 101. Businesses pay things like corporate taxes or infrastructure investments out of profits that they make from their customers, revenue received from the customer. The profits would be on top of expenses. That's how businesses work. Businesses provide a service or a product. The customer pays them. That's the revenue. That's their income. And out of that revenue, out of that income, they have to pay their business taxes. They have to pay any investors for what they owe the investors. They have to pay for infrastructure, changes and upkeep and maintenance and projects and everything. That's how you fund those things. There's no way as a business to fund those things without using revenue. Even if you're taking out a loan, you're using revenue to pay back the loan. Your business operates out of the revenue you receive from customers. So saying that customers shouldn't be paying for the cost of a business to do business is, I don't know where they got that, because that is literally how businesses work. That's how they run. Disaster assistance. The utility, due to its corporate structure, may require that customers pay directly or indirectly for 90% or more of damages to the utility's assets caused by extreme weather events, and may also deny the utility access to federal emergency management assistance to reduce or eliminate the cost. There are a lot of reasons why a company might elect not to participate in federal emergency management assistance programs. Number one, any programs like these typically come with an awful lot of paperwork. It takes time. You're not getting money right away. It can be faster and actually more cost effective for a company to forego those programs. And yes, of course, you are going to be paying for the cost of managing disasters out of the revenue you are receiving from your customer. That is how businesses work. They have revenue from the customer. And then they're paying for things, including unforeseen stuff, out of that revenue. Priorities. The utility, due to its corporate structure and fiduciary obligations, is unable to place the needs of the customers, workers, or the state's climate and connectivity goals ahead of the desires of the shareholders to earn a profit. Okay. In order for businesses to stay in business, to continue providing the services and the goods they provide, they have to be making enough money to cover everything and, hopefully some profit so that they have money to invest in other things. And yes, if you have shareholders, you do have to pay the shareholders something for the money they have invested in your company. This is how business works. So expecting a company to put the needs of the customer above everything else to the detriment of their income can mean that your business is going to fail, because you can't operate in a deficit indefinitely unless you're the government. They do it, but they get to print the money. Most of us don't. If we print the money, it's counterfeited. And putting the state's climate and connectivity goals, the state's climate and connectivity goals are not my business's responsibility. I said it. So no, a business should not be required to put the state's goals ahead of getting the revenue they need to operate their business. That's crazy. That's not what the government can't do that. You're trying to give the government power that they don't have any right to hold. Skipping some more stuff. This section, any consumer-owned transmission and distribution utility, except for the Pine Tree Power Company established in Chapter 4, that proposes to increase rates, tolls, or changes by not more than 15% of the utility's annual operating revenues, or proposes to decrease rates, tolls, or charges in any amount, may elect It may elect to set rates pursuant to this section and section 3503. So it's exempting Pine Tree Power Company from a section of this, and for good or bad. I mean, maybe it's good that they are exempted, but anytime you're creating a law and saying someone is exempted from this, that raises red flags for me, because the law is supposed to be the law. The law is supposed to be just. It's supposed to be fair. It's supposed to be equal. Justice is supposed to be blind. That means the same laws apply to you and to me and to them and to them. It applies to everybody equally. No one should get exemptions. No one should get free passes. Nobody should get special treatment under the law at all. No one should get different treatment under the law, or else it's not really justice. So anytime a law puts exemptions like this in for a particular company, that's a red flag. The governance board, this is talking about the 13 voting members, 7 of whom are elected, 6 of whom are designated members chosen by the elected members, which we talked about earlier. All members must be residents of the state. I mean, generally, and I don't think the government should be mandating this, but yes, generally, I think it's a good idea for people running a company to reside in the state that the company is in, especially when you're dealing with utilities. I mean, I think that it is wise for a utility company to choose to put people in charge of their company, in charge of running their company, who have experience in the industry in the state that they're operating in, because the needs of different areas, the needs of different states, the needs of different areas within a state are going to be very different. So someone with local knowledge and experience is invaluable and is probably going to make the best decisions when it comes to operating the business. But it is not up to the government to mandate that. Okay. 4 years after the first meeting of the board shall review the effectiveness of the company governance structure and shall report to the Joint Standing Committee of the Legislature having jurisdiction over energy and utility matters for the outcome of this review. The report may suggest necessary changes to the governance structure of the company. The committee may report out legislation pertaining to the recommendations of the report. So we have a utility company who is going to be accountable and reporting to the legislature, and that is not okay. It is not the legislature's job to micromanage businesses in Maine. And let's be blunt here, most of the legislators don't have any knowledge or practical experience of what the electric transmission industry is like. And that's fine. They're not supposed to, because they're not supposed to be running a utility company. But here you have a utility company reporting to them and being overseen by them by people who aren't necessarily even qualified. So again, businesses should not have to be reporting to the government in the manner that this is being set up as. That's not what the government is there to do. Limits on company generating property. The company may not own or operate a generating source or purchase electric capacity or energy from a generating source, except as the commission may approve in order to allow the company to maintain or improve system reliability. You can't tell a business you're not allowed to expand. That's not the government's job. It's not the government's job to say you cannot expand into this new market. You can't expand your existing business in this manner. That is not what they're there for. Acquisition of utility facilities and utility property. Notwithstanding any other provision of this title, rules adopted under this title, or other applicable law to the contrary, the company shall purchase or acquire by the exercise of the right of eminent domain all utility facilities in the state owned or operated or held for future use by any investor-owned transmission and distribution utility in accordance with this subsection, and may also purchase or acquire by the exercise of the right of eminent domain in accordance with the subsection any other investor-owned transmission and distribution utility property should the board determine such an acquisition to be in the interest of its customer owners. The company shall finance the purchase or acquisition of utility facilities or utility property under this subsection by issuing debt in accordance with Chapter 9. Eminent domain is what allows the government to say they need to build a fort. This is one of the very tiny list of things that they are allowed to do under eminent domain. They need to build a fort. Ideally, everybody who owns the land that the fort needs to be on would be willing to sell to the government at fair market value. If someone is not, they can actually make them sell under eminent domain. They still have to pay them fair market value. I think you can probably see that this has the potential to be highly abused. It's not something that should be used if it's at all possible to avoid it. And the restrictions on the use of eminent domain are stringent. It's very limited what they can apply this to. Unfortunately, it has been used to allow businesses to essentially steal land from people for the benefit of the business if it's determined to be in the economic interests or whatever other thing they can come up with. But it is theft. Look up Flagstaff Lake, look up Flagstaff Village. That's a part of Maine history you probably didn't learn in school, but this is a very good example of the abuse of eminent domain by, interestingly enough, Central Maine Power. Little fun fact, then Representative Percival Baxter, yes, Governor Baxter State Park, that Percival Baxter, he was actually strongly opposed to the application of eminent domain in that particular instance with Flagstaff Village and all of that. Rightly so. Yay, Governor Baxter. Well, he wasn't governor then, but in any case, that's a good example of an abuse of eminent domain. And that's what we see here, because eminent domain is not for the government to force a company to sell out to another company because it's in the interest of their customers. I mean, if Walmart comes to me and I own a little general store here in Maine and says it's in the best interest of our customers for us to buy your store. And so the state has said under eminent domain that we can do that you have to sell it to us. And this is the price that we've decided is fair market value. So you have no choice. I mean, that's not okay. I don't think anyone would think that's okay, but that's what's happening here. So eminent domain is something that should never be used for the benefit of a company because that's not what it's allowed to be used for. That is illegal. It's in violation of the laws of our land. Very important. Sorry, I get a little bit passionate about this stuff, as you can tell. Within 18 months after the effective date of this chapter, or 12 months after the first meeting of the board, whichever is later, unless further delayed to a date certain by a vote of at least 9 members of the board, the company shall identify the utility facilities and any other utility property in the state owned or operated or held for future use by any investor-owned transmission and distribution utility to be purchased by the company. Determine a purchase price offer to be made for the utility facilities and other utility property. The purchase price offer must include compensation for the cost of preparing and submitting necessary regulatory filings, including but not limited to those required by the Federal Department of Energy, Federal Energy Regulation Commission, and deliver notice of the purchase price offer, including detailed description of the utility facilities and other utility property to be purchased to the owner, investor, transmission, and distribution utility that owns, operates, or holds for future use the subject utility facilities and utility property. So essentially what's going to happen is Pioneer Power Company is going to send an offer to like CMP and Versant and say, hey, we're buying your utilities for this amount. After receipt of a notice of the purchase price offer under paragraph A, subparagraph 3, the investor-owned transmission and distribution utility may, within 30 days of the date of receipt, submit a counteroffer to the company. If the company rejects the counteroffer within 30 days, the date of receipt of the rejection of the investor-owned transmission and distribution utility may petition the Superior Court of Kennebec County to determine and order an alternative purchase price for the subject utility facilities or utility property in accordance with this paragraph. The purchase price determined by the court must include compensation for the cost of preparing and submitting necessary regulatory filings, including but not limited to those required by the Federal Department of Energy, Federal Energy Regulation Commission. After the filing of a petition by an investor-owned transmission, the distribution utility under this paragraph, the Superior Court, as expeditiously as possible, shall Basically, the court needs to, they can choose some arbitrators, go to a trial or hearing if possible, if required, and then render a decision based on recommended purchase price submitted and other information available. So say Versant and CMP say, no, we don't like that offer. They can send a counter offer to Pine Tree Power. Pine Tree Power can say, nope. And so it automatically goes to court because this sale is happening no matter what. Okay, this isn't two companies negotiating over whether or not they're going to sell their company to another company where, if we decide that you're not offering us good terms, we don't have to sell. We're not required to sell. No, this sale is happening, whether Versant and CMP like it or not. And the courts, if necessary, will decide what is fair for a purchase price. And everyone has the right to contract. That means nobody can compel me to enter into a contract with somebody else, and nobody can compel me not to enter into a contract with someone else. Now, obviously, there is a limit. You can't contract someone to commit a crime on your behalf. I can't contract someone or contract with someone for, commission of a robbery or harming someone else, except for that. Okay, you can't contract for the commission of a crime. But other than that, we have the freedom to contract or to choose not to contract as we see fit. This is removing the right to contract. And if they can do it to a utility, why can't they do it to your small business? Why can't they do it to you as an employee, saying you don't have the right to resign? You don't have the right to go get a better job at a different company because your right to contract is now subject to what the government deems necessary and acceptable and for the benefit of whoever. So this is taking the right to contract away, which is a huge deal because we all want to keep that right to contract, which is an inherent right. It's very important that the government does not start infringing upon that right, which is what this is. The taking of utility facilities and utility property by the company is governed by this paragraph. Notwithstanding Chapter 65 or any other provision of law to the contrary, if a petition is filed under paragraph B and if the company and subject utilities do not reach an agreement, the company shall, after any appeals are resolved, immediately take the subject utility facilities and utility property identified in paragraph A at the final price rendered by the court. Notwithstanding Chapter 65 or any other provision of law to the contrary, if a petition is not filed under paragraph B and if the company and subject utilities do not reach an agreement, the company shall immediately take the subject utility facilities and utility property identified in paragraph A at the purchase price offer. This is akin to you've got a car and I like that car and I want that car, so I want to buy it from you. I go to you, I say, hey, I'll give you $500 for your car. And you're like, no, I'm not interested in selling, but hey, thanks. Well, if I went and took your car, it wouldn't matter whether I left you a check for $500 or not. I still stole your car. You're still stealing a company. You're stealing a business. It doesn't matter whether you leave a check on their doorstep for what you've determined is a fair price. You are still taking their property without their consent. You're violating the right to contract or not contract. Cost of service rates. The rates and all other charges of the company must be sufficient to pay in full the cost of service, including the cost of debt and property taxation. This is kind of a no-brainer. Business 101, a company has to take in enough revenue to pay their obligations. So their big selling point is, we're going to lower electric rates. This is going to be great. Well, they still have to make enough money to operate the company. They still have to make enough money to cover all of that debt they incurred by buying out the utilities. And they still have to pay their property tax obligations too, because they're not exempt from that. they can't guarantee that they will actually be able to charge lower rates once all of that is taken into effect. This is not a good business plan. So there's a reason this is going through the process of making it a law instead of being an actual business deal, because this is a terrible business plan. I'm not sure if they actually have a business plan. It would be interesting to know. They're just they're making promises that I don't see how they will be able to really keep them necessarily. Income tax, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, income of the company is exempt from all taxation or assessment by the state or any political subdivision of the state. All bonds and notes and other evidences of indebtedness issued by the company are legal investments for savings banks in this state and are exempt from state income tax. So again, you have a company, and because they are considered a nonprofit, they will be paying absolutely no business taxes. I mean, that's a pretty sweet deal. I know a whole bunch of other business owners who'd really love to be exempt from taxes too. So, and keep in mind, the state of Maine's losing a good chunk of revenue from this. How are they going to make up for that? They're probably not going to cut expenditures. They're probably going to be raising the tax another way. And who's going to be footing that bill? That's right, you and I. This one's kind of odd. Termination of the company. The company may not be dissolved or cease operations except by authorization of law, and only if all debt and liabilities of the company have been paid or a sufficient amount for the payment of all debt and liabilities has been placed in an irrevocable trust for the benefit of the holders of the debt, and only if any remaining equity of the company is returned in an equitable manner to the customers of the company. Okay, so say Pine Tree Power fails spectacularly. They can't operate a utility in the manner that they think they're going to be able to. They can't meet the requirements that are now set by law for them to continue operating a utility. What happens? I mean, the business can't be dissolved except by passing a law. And it can only be dissolved if they can pay all of the debt obligations, which they are incurring a significant amount of that at the creation of their company when they issue debt against future revenue in order to pay for obtaining the other utilities that they're going to take over. What happens if they haven't paid that all off? That's going to be a significant amount of money. I don't know how long it will take them to pay it off. I would imagine it's going to take a long time. What if the business fails before then? What happens? I mean, you can't dissolve it, but it's not able to meet the other obligations set down here. This is not addressed, and this is a glaring issue. This is a case of we're not allowing this business to fail even once it actually has. And that's not a good thing. Government not allowing a business to fail is not a good thing. Because if you allow a business to keep operating under the bad decisions and the bad organization and everything that has gotten it to this point, then I mean, how is that going to get better? It's better to allow a business to fail. And sometimes that happens. And admittedly, sometimes that does happen through no fault of the business owners. Things just happen. Businesses fail all the time. It's part of the process of the market. And interfering with that and propping up failing businesses is not doing anyone any favors ultimately, because bad businesses fail and other businesses take their place. And yes, sometimes good businesses fail through no fault of their own. Things can happen. But it's just the cycle of the market. Businesses close, new ones open. This is how it works. That's very problematic because it's subverting the natural cycle of our economy. Annual report by April 15th of each year, beginning no more than 1 year after the first meeting of the board. The company shall submit a report to the Joint Standing Committee of the legislature having jurisdiction over energy and utility matters, summarizing the activities and performance of the company in meeting its obligations to its customer owners and its responsibilities under sections 4002, 4003 during the preceding calendar year and its plans for the current year and subsequent 5 years. Each annual report must describe in detail how the company's decisions, operations, and use of low-cost financing have supported and will support the state's progress toward the Climate Action Plan goals established in Title 38, Chapter 3A, and how such financing has affected and will affect job creation and gross state product. Again, it is not the responsibility of a business to meet the government's goals. This is government overreach. Industries reporting to the legislature in this manner is an overreach of government power. That's not what the government is there for. The government's not supposed to run the utilities and make sure the utilities are run properly. That's not their job, okay? Their job is to make sure rights are not infringed upon and deal with crime. This is outside of their scope of authority. Plan minimum requirements. At a minimum, the 5-year plan under this section must also include a program to establish the lower rates for low-income residential customers, build across the state accessible rapid charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, reduce make-ready and pole attachment costs for open access fiber optic cable in unserved and underserved areas of the state as defined in Section 9202, subsection 5, and make rapid investments in the distribution network to upgrade reliability and to improve capacity for interconnections of new renewable generation and storage facilities. If there is market demand for rapid charging stations, somebody will come along and say, I'm starting a business that is these rapid recharging stations. And they will coordinate with the electric company and say, hey, I want to do this. How do I get electric service to my new rapid charging station that I'm opening up? If there is market demand for it, it will happen. The government does not need to mandate it. The government is not supposed to mandate it. This is not within their scope of authority. If there is demand for something, the market will see it happening. What happens is you have the government saying, well, we need to support this, so they end up propping up things that there's not enough demand for, or models that aren't actually sustainable. Because for something to be truly sustainable, you need to look at not just environmentalism. You need to look at economic sustainability as well. Something might sound like a great idea, but if it's not something that can function without perpetual propping up from the government, if it's not profitable and economically feasible and sustainable in and of itself, the government throwing money at it to prop it up is not going to be beneficial, because eventually the government will move on to other projects, stop throwing money at that thing that needs the government fund to prop it up, and then guess what happens? Those finally go away because all the funding dries up and they're not a sustainable option. Let the market decide. Let the market drive the solutions. That's how we get sustainable solutions. The Public Utilities Commission shall examine all laws that may be affected by this act or need to be changed as a result of this act, including laws governing the Pine Tree Power Company as established under the Maine Revised Statutes, Title 35A, Section 4002, and laws relating to investor-owned transmission and distribution utilities that may be eliminated as a result of this act. The Commission shall determine any modifications to laws that may be necessary or appropriate as a result of this act or to effectuate the purposes of this act, and shall submit proposed legislation to the Joint Standing Committee of the legislature having jurisdiction over energy, utilities, and technology matters no later than 6 months after the first meeting of the Pine Tree Power Company Board under Title 35A, Section 4002. So they are admitting there's probably going to need to be law changes and everything going on as a result of this that we haven't foreseen. I think there's a lot of stuff they haven't foreseen. And ultimately, my biggest problem with this is ultimately it is not within the scope of the government to be doing some of these things and taking the actions outlined in this citizens initiative. It is an abuse of government authority to be using things like eminent domain to force a company to sell to somebody else, to another company. There's a lot of misuse of power in this. There's a lot of things that are very vague and open-ended. As I said, if something has to be propped up by the government to make it work or to make it feasible and sustainable economically, it's probably a bad solution. This looks like a very bad solution because you've got government abuse and overreach of power, and you have something that's not sustainable economically, that doesn't make business or economic sense. And if that's the case, it's just not going to work. It's destined to failure as soon as the government propping it up stops happening. Real solutions need to be market-driven and need to be something that makes sense and don't require the government to be stepping in and making it happen or propping it up, because that's not what the government is here for. So I know this has been a really long video. Anyone who is stuck around this long, thank you so much. Thank you for listening. As you can probably tell, economics and political theory is kind of a hobby of mine. So I find things like this interesting. I enjoy reading proposed legislation and kind of picking things apart. I would like to know what you think in the comments down below. What do you think of this? Have you read through it? Oh, another question. Before you vote on citizens initiatives or bonds or anything else, do you read those? Do you find the text and read them before you go vote? Or do you just kind of make a snap decision at the poll based on ads or something else? I'm curious. I'm really curious. I don't know. I always read things ahead of time because I've always been the don't sign the paperwork until you've read the fine print, you know? So for me, reading the fine print's important, and I always do that, but I am curious how people make decisions when it comes to voting on issues like this. Do you read the fine print, or do you just kind of go based on the ads that you see? And why or why not? So let me know in the comments. I hope you're back for some more book reviews and some of the new stuff that's coming. I'm really excited about that. I'm excited to be sharing that with you. But in any case, thank you so much for sticking with me through this. I hope you have a great day. Bye.